Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you are joining us for, well, quite a journey through perhaps our most expansive and surprising stack of sources yet.
It really is something.
We are truly bridging worlds here from, the rigorous mathematics of Wall Street trading models all the way to ancient philosophy on personal habits and then deep into real estate financing, even the painful, often forgotten history of how American cities were, well, designed and segregated.
That's absolutely right. The source material is incredibly varied, but the mission, I think, remains singular for you, the listener. We're distilling the absolute foundational principles you need for establishing financial autonomy and genuine long-term wealth creation.
But it's not just about personal strategy, is it?
No, not at all. You have to set that personal pursuit against this, frankly, ruthless backdrop of systemic risks, markets that are highly imperfect, sometimes deeply flawed, and centuries of history that still shape opportunity today.
So the goal isn't just tactics.
No, our goal is to give you not just the strategy, but the, let's say, unbreakable mindset, and critically, the awareness of these massive forces you absolutely have to navigate.
And that awareness brings us right to, I think, the core paradox we pulled from this entire stack.
Which is?
How can any individual, the diligent saver, the sophisticated investor, even the keen property owner, how can you find reliable, quote-unquote, safe success when the very systems we depend on?
Right.
Whether it's the rating agencies meant to police Wall Street or maybe the government housing programs meant to encourage ownership, how can you rely on them when they are demonstrably riddled with massive hidden and sometimes just outright destructive risk?
It really forces you to build your personal fortress on, well, shifting sand. If you don't understand exactly how that sand shifts, and maybe more importantly, why it shifts, you're basically operating blind.
Okay, let's start then with this sort of theoretical ideal of the financial world. It's a great launch pad for seeing how reality actually works. I'm talking about the efficient market hypothesis, or EMH.
Right, the EMH. It's this premise that the market is just so smart and so fast that the price of any stock, any security, instantly reflects all available news.
It sounds very neat, very academic.
It is deeply appealing, especially to the academic mind, yeah. In its purest form, the EMH suggests that trying to pick superior stocks or, and to anticipate the market's general direction based on public information, it's futile.
Because the price already knows.
Exactly. The price has already absorbed that information. But, the sources actually break the EMH down into three distinct forms. It's worth touching on those because they define the limits of what a person can really achieve.
Okay, let's walk through them.
So first, you have the weak form. This basically says that past prices and trading volume data, totally useless for predicting future movements.
Yep.
Technical analysis is out.
Got it. No patterns in the charts matter.
According to the weak form, no. Then there's a semi-strong form. This one says that all publicly available information, think financial statements, news articles, economic forecasts, it's all already baked into the price.
This is the one most investors probably bump up against.
Precisely. And finally, there's the strong form. This one asserts that even insider or private information can't help you consistently beat the market.
Which seems unlikely.
Well, the sources pretty quickly dismiss that one as unrealistic.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at how often we see insider trading scandals. It clearly suggests non-public info can be profitable, even if illegal.
Okay, so if the semi-strong form were perfectly true, the market would just be a complete random walk, right? And the odds of beating it would be, well, basically zero.
Statistically, yes. But, and this is a big but, the sources cite overwhelming evidence that the market, thankfully for those of us who believe in, let's say, rational investment, doesn't conform perfectly to this ideal.
It's a non-random walk.
Exactly. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to beat, not at all.
Yeah.
But it means we see market behaviors that suggest prices adjust over time, not, instantaneously.
So what's the key evidence for this non-random walk? What are we actually seeing?
Well, we see evidence of momentum, particularly in the short term. The sources cite economists who found that when really good news comes out about a company, investors often only partially adjust their estimates of the stock price initially.
They sort of ease into it?
Kind of. That slow, partial adjustment causes prices to continue rising steadily for a period, sometimes a few months. It imparts this measurable degree of short-term momentum. It suggests there's a behavioral element, Investors don't fully grasp the implications of new information right away.
Okay, but hold on. If there's short-term momentum, why don't the sources just say, go chase that momentum? Isn't there money to be made there?
But the sources are highly, highly cautionary about that. While the momentum exists, it's often, well, too small, too erratic, And then you have transaction costs.
Commissions, spreads.
Right. Commissions, the bid-ask spread, the sheer time required. Those costs are usually enough to eat away that small, short-term statistical advantage. But the real nail in the coffin for active management, trying to beat the market consistently, is the sheer lack of consistency and long-term performance.
That failure is consistent, ironically. Can you give us the data on that?
It is. It's like an iron law shown repeatedly across decades. If you analyze the performance of actively managed mutual funds, there is essentially zero consistency in superior results over time.
So the winners don't keep winning.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Look at the top 20 funds from the 1970s. In the 1980s, they performed well below average. Same pattern again. The best funds of the 1990s often loaded up with hot, high-growth internet stocks, right?
Sure, the dot-com darling.
Exactly. They had an absolutely disastrous record in the early 2000s after that bulb burst. This isn't just bad luck. It feels structural. Managers are often forced to chase last year's winners, plus the higher fees just compound the problem.
So the conclusion, which, yeah, takes the fun out of it for a lot of people, seems pretty unavoidable.
It really is. The indexing strategy, just buying the entire market, like through a total stock market fund, is the most highly recommended core for basically every investment portfolio.
Why? Because it just accepts the average.
Because it's the most sensible strategy. It relies on the broad, long-run uptrend aligned with overall global earnings and economic growth. The sources joke that telling investors there's no hope of beating the averages is like telling a 6-year-old that there is no Santa Claus.
Huh. Yeah, I can see that.
But the adult reality is that minimizing fees and maximizing diversification pretty much guarantees you the market's average return. And historically, that average return beats the vast majority of professionals trying to outperform it.
Okay, so moving from the theory of the market to the, let's say, harsh reality of risk. We all know the adage, higher returns require higher risk. But what does the hard data actually tell us about that trade-off in stocks and bonds?
Well, the statement is consistently validated by history, yes, but it's deeply dependent on your time frame. Higher returns are consistently associated with considerably higher risk.
How do they measure that risk?
Usually by standard deviation, which is just a measure of the dispersion or volatility of those returns. For example, small company stocks, going back to 1926, have offered a statistically higher rate of return than large company stocks.
Okay, that's good.
But the standard deviation of those returns, meaning the degree of volatility, the wild swings up and down, has been significantly larger. So yes, you generally get paid more over the long run, but you absolutely must be prepared for a much, much wilder ride.
And that volatility isn't just a number on a page. It means surviving potentially massive periods of negative performance. People often forget the market can deliver years of pain before you see the reward.
That's crucial context, absolutely crucial. The sources cite multiple historical periods where common stocks produce negative rates of return for 5 years or even longer. Think about the catastrophic crash from 1930 to 1932. Just devastating.
Right.
Or the stagnant high inflation periods of the early 1970s, or more recently, the entire first decade of the 2000s, often called the lost decade for stocks.
Yeah, I remember that. Brutal.
Exactly. Investors were rewarded for taking on that massive risk only over the long haul, and we're talking measured in decades. If you panicked and liquidated your position during one of those severe bear markets, well, you paid the full price for taking on that risk without getting the eventual reward.
Which really highlights the importance of asset allocation, doesn't it? Especially when we look at something like real estate assets, maybe structured as real estate investment trusts or REITs.
Yes, REITs can offer a vital stabilizing factor in a portfolio. Structurally, because they own tangible assets and are required to distribute most of their taxable income to shareholders as dividends.
Right, that's key.
They tend to show a lower correlation to the broader equity market. That diversification is really valuable. During major equity bear markets like 2000 to 2001 after the tech bubble, or even the 2008 crisis, REITs often proved to be more stable or recovered more quickly than the general stock market. They suffered less steep initial declines.
But there's a flip side.
There can be. Conversely, they might lag during sharply rising markets like we saw in, say, 1995, 1998, or 1999 during the tech boom. But that relative stability, that lower volatility, that's the value they provide.
So when analysts are looking at a REIT, what specific metric are they really focused on? Are they worried about the liquidation value of every single office building or shopping mall?
Not primarily, no. I mean, while real estate assets are generally more liquid than, say, the specialized machinery of a manufacturing company, the focus for analysts is on the REIT as an operating company, not just a basket of assets to be sold off.
You're looking at cash flow.
Exactly. They're focused on growing cash flow and ultimately dividends. The crucial metric here is FFO, which stands for Funds from Operations.
Okay, FFO. We need to define that. Why FFO instead of just standard earnings like you see with other companies?
Good question. FFO is the preferred metric because it excludes certain accounting items like depreciation and amortization. These are large non-cash charges in standard real estate accounting.
Because buildings don't wear out like machines.
Well, GAAP accounting treats them like they do. But in reality, real estate assets tend to appreciate or at least hold their value over long periods, not depreciate down to zero like a piece of factory equipment. So standard GAAP earnings often understate the true economic performance of a REIT. FFO adds back depreciation and amortization to give a better picture of the actual cash flow being generated.
And what kind of FFO growth are analysts looking for?
Typically, they look for steady, predictable FFO growth, often somewhere in the 5% to 6% range annually. Because this steady growth is what supports those all-important dividend increases, which is what REIT investors ultimately care most about.
Okay, so we have the core investment strategy indexing and a diversification strategy, maybe REITs. The next foundational layer for financial economy has to be leveraging the tax system, right? Because a dollar saved on taxes is arguably more valuable than a dollar earned in pre-tax interest.
Absolutely critical. It's often overlooked just how powerful tax savings can be over the long term.
Let's look at the classic retirement account trade-off first. Traditional versus Roth IRA.
Right. This is the critical choice between, as the sources put it, jam today versus jam tomorrow. And the decision really hinges on your expectations for your future tax bracket compared to your current one.
Explain that. Jam today.
The traditional IRA offers an immediate tax deduction. That's the jam today. You save on taxes now, likely while you're in a high-earning phase of your career. The catch: every dollar of withdrawal in retirement, including all the earnings, is taxed as ordinary income.
Okay, so defer the tax and jam tomorrow.
That's the Roth IRA. It flips the equation completely. You get no upfront deduction on your contributions. You pay taxes now, but all those withdrawals in retirement, including decades of investment earnings, are completely tax-free. That's the jam tomorrow.
So who wins, Roth or traditional?
Well, for younger investors or anyone who expects to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement than they are now, the Roth is often the superior choice mathematically. Locking in tax-free growth can be incredibly powerful over decades.
And crucially, our sources mention ways to use retirement money for direct real estate deals. This seems like a key path to that self-reliance, moving beyond just stocks and bonds.
This is a huge, often underutilized strategy. It is perfectly legal to use retirement money, say, from an old 401k you rolled over, or an existing IRA for direct real estate investments. Rental properties, fix and flips, private notes.
But you can't just write a check from your regular brokerage IRA, right?
Correct. You can't simply use your standard IRA account held at a typical bank or brokerage. You have to transfer those funds to specialized firms called self-directed retirement custodians.
Self-directed custodians, okay.
These custodians, unlike the usual firms, are authorized to hold non-traditional assets, things like actual rental properties, promissory notes secured by real estate, or even private equity stakes. Not just the standard list of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. This allows you to truly diversify your retirement nest egg into assets you understand and control more directly.
Now, for wealth building outside those tax-deferred accounts, we absolutely have to talk about the 1031 exchange. This gives investment real estate a profound advantage over, say, selling stocks.
The 1031 exchange is arguably the single most powerful wealth building tool available specifically to real estate investors. Why? Because it allows for potentially indefinite tax-deferred growth.
How does it work, basically?
It's defined in Section 1031 of the IRS Code.
Yeah.
It's a mechanism that allows you to defer paying capital gains tax when you sell one investment property. If you acquire a like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value within a specific time frame.
Like-kind is pretty broad for real estate, right?
Very broad. Basically, any real property held for investment qualifies. But the process is rigid. Critically, these exchanges must be structured through a neutral third party called a qualified intermediary, or QI. You can't touch the money yourself, and the clock starts ticking the moment you close the sale on your original property.
And what are those time rules? I hear they're incredibly strict.
They are absolutely rigid, which is why you really need professional help, like a QI and knowledgeable advisors. Once you sell the original relinquished property, you have exactly 35 calendar days to formally identify potential replacement properties in writing to your QI.
Just 45 days, that's tight.
It is. And then you must close on the purchase of one or more of those identified replacement properties within 180 calendar days from the date you sold the original property. Not 180 days from identification, 180 days from the initial sale.
Wow. Miss either deadline.
And the entire deferred capital gain becomes immediately taxable in the year of the sale. It's a high-stakes, time-sensitive game. No extensions, no excuses.
But the real power, the advanced strategy you mentioned, comes much later, potentially at the end of life.
That's what the sources refer to as dying while owning. You can theoretically chain these 1031 exchanges together indefinitely throughout your lifetime, continually rolling over gains and deferring the tax liability, perhaps for decades.
So you never pay the tax.
Well, you might not. If you hold the property until death, your beneficiaries typically receive the asset at what's called a stepped-up basis. This means their acquisition cost basis for tax purposes is reset to the fair market value at the time of your death, not your original decades-old purchase price plus improvements.
So all those deferred capital gains
May effectively become permanently tax-free for your heirs. They could sell the property shortly after inheriting it and owe little or no capital gains tax. This is a profound, potentially generational advantage that appreciated stock held until death doesn't always enjoy in exactly the same way due to different basis rules.
Okay, we've laid out some external systems, financial markets, the tax code. They have clear rules, but as we've seen, they can be subtly or not so subtly rigged against the average individual. But our sources strongly suggest the biggest challenge often isn't external, it's the internal identity we bring to the game.
Absolutely. This brings us to the inner game of success. The material stresses really hammers home that the most effective engine for lasting change and success isn't focusing on external outcomes, but on cultivating your internal identity.
What does that mean exactly?
It means if you don't genuinely believe you are the type of person who saves money, who invests wisely, or who negotiates effectively, your attempts are likely doomed to fail in the long run. You might force it for a while, but it won't stick.
Let's unpack that. The sources describe 3 levels of change. Can you break those down?
Sure. The 3 levels are, first, focusing on outcomes. That's what you achieve, like, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to make X dollars.
The goal.
Right, the goal. Second is focusing on process. That's what you do, like, I will go to the gym 3 times a week, or I will save 10% of my paycheck.
The actions.
The actions, the system. But the deepest, most powerful level is focusing on identity. That's about who you wish to become. Like, I am becoming a healthy person, or I am an investor.
And why is identity the most effective?
Because the core behavioral truth is that behavior incongruent with your self-image, your identity, simply will not last. You might manage the process for a few weeks, maybe even months. But if your underlying identity is still, say, that of a couch potato or a spender, you will eventually regress to behaviors that align with that identity.
So the idea that every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become, that's incredibly powerful. It turns small daily decisions into something much bigger.
It completely reframes the stakes, doesn't it? Your identity emerges out of your habits. Every time you consistently show up, maybe you go to the gym, even if you have a terrible workout, you are casting a vote for the identity of an athlete, or at least someone who prioritizes health.
It builds evidence for yourself.
Exactly. If you continuously edit your beliefs and upgrade your self-perception, if you start genuinely thinking of yourself as an owner, not just a renter, or as an investor, not just a consumer, you are building the only foundation that can support sustained long-term success. The behavior follows the belief.
And this framework ties directly into the mechanics of the habit loop the sources talk about. Cue right error response, right error reward. How do we manipulate that loop to reinforce this new identity?
Well, a key insight for building good habits is that they must be made easy, obvious, attractive, and satisfying, especially easy and convenient. We had to reduce the friction between the person you are now and the desired end state, the identity you want.
Make it easier to do the right thing?
Precisely. For example, if you want to start exercising in the morning, you must lay out your workout clothes the night before. Reduce that decision fatigue at 6 a.m. If you want to start saving consistently, you have to automate the transfer the minute your paycheck hits your account. Don't rely on willpower alone.
Because friction kills follow-through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The greater the obstacle, the more difficult the response, the less likely you are to follow through, especially on days when motivation is low, which it inevitably will be sometimes. Making a good habit obvious and easy, is essential to ensure you do it even when you don't feel like it. That's how you cast those votes consistently.
This connects really well to the concept of self-programming, doesn't it? This idea of voluntarily feeding your subconscious mind.
Exactly. This is where practices like autosuggestion and affirmations come in. You have to consciously, deliberately set the tone for your life and feed your mind the right inputs.
How does that work in practice?
The sources describe a procedure, often attributed to thinkers like Napoleon Hill. You write down a clear statement of your desire for wealth, for a specific achievement, for better health. You read it aloud, maybe twice daily, morning and night. And crucially, as you read it, you must visualize and feel yourself already in possession of it.
So it's not just repeating words.
No, the feeling, the emotion, the absolute faith is key. This practice, done consistently, communicates the object of your desire directly to your subconscious mind, bypassing the critical, doubting conscious mind. Over time, the subconscious starts working to bring that desire into reality.
And there's a specific daily methodology cited in the materials that helps structure this intention setting.
Yes, the practice often called the miracle morning, popularized by Hal Elrod, drawing on timeless principles. It's a framework designed to help you consciously set your intention for the day before the world's distractions take over.
What does it involve?
It typically includes practices summed up by the acronym SAVERS. Silence, like meditation or prayer. Affirmations, that auto-suggestion piece. Visualization, seeing your goals achieved. Exercise, even just a few minutes. Reading, something uplifting or educational. And scribing, journaling.
So it's about starting the day proactively.
Exactly. By doing this early, you proactively set the intention to wake up with genuine desire and enthusiasm. You're priming your mind for personal development and success rather than letting the urgencies and anxieties of the day dictate your mental state from the moment you wake up.
Okay, let's apply this identity mindset now specifically to the world of investing and finance. Starting with that core trap, the sources say prevents so many people from achieving financial autonomy. The rat race.
Ah, the rat race.
Yeah.
As defined by the Rich Dad observations in the source material, it vividly describes the constant state of financial struggle that many in the middle class find themselves in, even with rising incomes.
What's the core dynamic driving it?
The crucial dynamic is this. Their primary income is salary from a job. And as their wages increase, their expenses tend to increase right along with them, often in proportion. You get a raise, you buy a bigger car, or a larger house, or more consumer goods.
Lifestyle inflation.
Exactly, it's a treadmill. And this cycle is reinforced by the common mindset of treating their primary residence, which typically doesn't generate income as their main asset, instead of prioritizing investment in assets that actually produce cash flow, like rental properties or dividend-paying stocks.
So the philosophy is a raise means you can spend more.
That philosophy, that a raise primarily means you can inflate your lifestyle, is cited in the sources as the very foundation of a debt-ridden society. You're always working for money, rather than having your money work for you. That's the essence of the rat race.
So if the rat race is all about chasing the yes to more spending, yes to more consumption, then successful negotiation, interestingly, seems to require mastering the counterintuitive power of the strategic no.
Yes, this is a fascinating insight from behavioral economics and negotiation theory found in our sources. It suggests you actually want to welcome or even explicitly invite a solid no early on in a negotiation or even just a sales conversation.
Invite a no. That sounds backward. Why?
Because an immediate no is often actually a sign of engagement. It means the other person is listening, thinking critically, and feels safe enough to disagree or state their boundaries. An immediate, easy yes, conversely, can sometimes just mean compliance, or maybe they're just trying to end the conversation quickly without really committing. The no often starts the real conversation.
Okay, so how do you practically invite that no without sounding totally defeatist, like you expect rejection?
A great example given is asking a simple, non-threatening, permission-based question right at the start, like, is now a bad time to talk? Or would it be ridiculous to suggest?
What does that achieve?
If they say, no, it's not a bad time, fantastic. You'll likely have their full attention. If they say, yes, it is a bad time, they'll either give you a better time or politely ask you to go away. Both outcomes are useful.
Yeah.
By explicitly giving them the psychological freedom to say no, you grant the counterpart a feeling of safety, security, and control. It signals that they are engaged and thinking, rather than feeling pressured or immediately defensive about an ask they feel trapped into.
That makes sense. It lowers their guard.
Precisely.
And this emphasis on relationship, safety, and comfort seems central to effective sales too, based on the sources. It's really not about the slick, fast-talking salesperson stereotype anymore.
Not at all. If you want sustainable success. Successful sales, at its core, is about finding a sincere way to connect and build genuine rapport. The sources use the phrase, "People don't like being sold, but they love shopping with friends."
So it's about becoming that trusted friend, metaphorically.
In a way, yes. You have to move past the immediate gratification of just trying to close the deal and focus instead on establishing trust and comfort. Buying, especially a significant purchase, is an inherently emotional experience.
Empathy becomes key.
Empathy is absolutely critical. You need to genuinely put your own ego aside and listen carefully. And listening doesn't just mean waiting for your turn to talk. It means truly trying to comprehend what the other person is saying, understanding the emotional experience behind their buying decision or their hesitation before you even think about formulating your response. If you're just reloading your arguments while they're talking, you've already lost the relationship and likely the sale.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of building wealth through real estate specifically, particularly the operational side. Our sources highlight a pretty basic economic principle about why an investor should almost always outsource crucial tasks to profit-seeking entities rather than trying to do it all themselves.
Yeah, the general principle is simple, but quite powerful when you apply it. It's that profit-seeking companies think private contractors, professional property managers, even specialized lenders often perform specific tasks better or cheaper than, say, nonprofit entities, or you trying to do it internally as the owner.
Why is that? Incentives.
Exactly. It boils down to incentives and constraints. They have the strong incentive created by the prospect of profit, and they face the harsh discipline imposed by the threat of losses if they're inefficient. This is why you typically hire a specialized HVAC repair company instead of trying to learn the trade yourself for your rental property. Their business depends on doing it efficiently and correctly to minimize their own costs and keep customers happy. Outsourcing leverages their expertise and incentive structure.
Speaking of outsourcing and leverage, let's dive into the financing side, particularly the difference between standard conventional loans and more specialized financing, like bridge loans.
Right. So conventional loans are the standard route for stable, occupied properties. They require a significant down payment, especially for investment properties, typically 20% to 30%.
And lots of paperwork.
Oh, yes. You need to meet stringent debt-to-income ratios, provide extensive income verification, good credit score, the whole 9 yards. They're generally safe, offer the lowest long-term interest rates, but they can be slow and inflexible.
Okay, so what about the alternative? You mentioned specialized financing, like hard money loans.
Right. Hard money sounds a bit intimidating, maybe.
It does. Why would any rational investor choose to pay the incredibly high interest rates and fees, often double or even triple conventional rates that come with hard money?
Speed and flexibility, primarily. Hard money loans are typically made by private lenders or small groups, not big banks. They are secured primarily, sometimes solely, by the hard asset itself, the property.
So they care less about the borrower's income.
Often, yes. They focus more on the property's value, especially its potential, after repair value, ARV. This makes them fast. You can sometimes get funding in days, not weeks or months. They often require less income verification. And critically, they will often lend on properties that wouldn't qualify for conventional financing.
Like what kind of properties?
Usually properties needing significant rehab, or maybe properties with unusual circumstances like non-paying tenants that a bank wouldn't touch. Hard money is typically used as a short-term bridge loan. House flippers use it all the time to acquire a distressed property quickly, do the rehab, and then refinance into a stable, long-term conventional loan once the property is fixed up and potentially rented out. The high cost is justified by the speed and ability to secure a deal they'd otherwise miss.
Got it. Now, a metric central to all financing, especially for investment properties, is the loan-to-value ratio, or LTV. What are the implications of LTV for our listeners thinking about buying rentals?
LTV is absolutely crucial because it directly indicates the lender's exposure to risk. It's simply the loan amount divided by the property's appraised value. For investment properties, lenders commonly require the LTV to be less than 80%, and often they prefer it closer to 70%.
Why tougher standards than for a primary home? Because the bank views investment properties as inherently riskier. Think about it. If a borrower gets into financial trouble, which mortgage are they more likely to stop paying first, the roof over their own head or the rental property across town?
Environmental, probably.
Almost always. Therefore, the bank demands more skin in the game from you, the investor, in the form of a larger down payment, which means a lower LTV. A lower LTV, meaning you're putting down more cash or have more equity, significantly improves your chances of getting the loan approved and potentially negotiating more favorable terms and a lower interest rate.
Yeah.
You appear to be a much safer bet to the lender.
Okay, so once the property is secured, maybe with that hard money loan, the next step is maximizing its value through strategic rehab. The sources give us a great analogy for where to focus your renovation dollars, the cake versus icing principle.
All right, I like that analogy. It's all about prioritizing necessity over luxury, especially when dealing with investment properties. The cake represents the essential structural and aesthetic repairs needed for the house to be safe, habitable, and generally align with the basic standard of the competition in that specific market.
Things like
Roof, functional plumbing and electrical systems, clean paint, decent flooring, working appliances. This is where you must focus your money first. Get the cake baked properly.
And the icing.
The icing refers to the additional perks, the upgrades, the luxury add-ons, things like high-end designer light fixtures, maybe expensive smart home technology, fancy landscaping. When you're rehabbing, especially for a rental property or even a flick, you have to be very careful. You might not be able to justify any icing at all.
why not? Don't nicer things attract better tenants or buyers?
They can, but only up to a point. The goal is to avoid over-improving for the neighborhood or spending more on the rehab than the actual value you add to the properties. After repair value, ARV. You need to know what the market expects and will pay for and not go beyond that. Focus on the cake first.
Can you give us some specific high-impact renovation hacks that fall under that cake category, but maybe provide the biggest bang for the buck?
Sure. The kitchen is almost always the most important room for value. Instead of a full cabinet replacement, which is incredibly expensive, you can often achieve maybe 80% of the visual impact by just replacing the cabinet doors and painting the existing cabinet boxes or frames. Saves a ton of money.
Smart. What else?
Countertops. Granite and quartz used to be luxury items, but they've become so widely produced that they're now quite affordable, especially compared to laminate. They provide a huge visual lift, look modern, and are very durable and easy to clean. Big perceived value add.
Good one. Anything structural?
A major value add, if the layout allows, is strategically increasing the number of bedrooms. Perhaps by converting a large den, an office, or even a section of a large basement playroom, provided it has proper egress, like a window, and meets local code requirements to be legally classified as a bedroom. Adding a bedroom almost always significantly increases the marketable value and rent potential.
That makes sense. How about the exterior?
On the exterior, think about longevity versus initial cost. For roofing, while standard asphalt shingles are cheaper up front, considering metal roofs, despite their higher initial cost, can be smart for a long-term hold. They often last 50 years or more, compared to maybe 15-25 for asphalt, saving immense replacement cost and hassle over the long run.
Okay, the final step in operations, after rehab, is protecting that investment by dealing with tenants. Many landlords, especially new ones, try to save that 8% to 10% fee and avoid professional property management. But the sources warn the sheer scope of the job is staggering, especially concerning legal liability.
Oh, it absolutely is. Property managers handle an immense variety of tasks that self-managing landlords often drastically underestimate until they're drowning in them.
Like what, specifically?
Well, it starts with effective marketing of vacancies, then the time-consuming process of scheduling and conducting showings. Then comes the highly specialized and legally sensitive process of screening prospective tenants.
That screening is key, isn't it?
It's critical. Good managers do detailed checks, criminal background, credit history, employment and income verification, and very importantly, previous rental history, including checking for prior evictions. People can, and often do, lie brazenly on applications. A bad tenant can cost you thousands, far more than the management fee.
And it doesn't stop once the tenant is in place.
Not at all. Managers handle all the rent collection, chasing late payments, dealing with tenant complaints, coordinating maintenance requests, often those lovely late-night emergency calls, and preparing meticulous monthly financial reports for the owner.
Let's talk numbers, though. How much of a drain on cash flow is professional management, typically? And why do successful, experienced investors usually accept that cost?
It is a significant line item, no doubt. Property management typically costs somewhere between 8% to 10% of the monthly rent collected. On top of that, there's usually a hefty fee for placing a new tenant, often ranging from 50% to sometimes even 100% of the first month's rent.
Wow, a full month's rent just to place someone.
It's common, yes. Some companies might also charge an annual lease renewal fee, so it definitely impacts your cash flow. Successful investors accept this cost because they view the manager not just as an expense, but as a crucial component of their system.
A system for what?
A system that allows them to scale their operations beyond just one or two properties, that helps mitigate their significant legal liability and, maybe most importantly, protects their own time, which they value more highly than that 8–10% fee. They want to manage their portfolio, not clog toilets.
Beyond the financial cost and the time savings, what's the single most important legal responsibility for a landlord that they absolutely must understand intimately?
Every single landlord, whether using a manager or not, must read and fully understand their state's specific Landlord-Tenant Act or equivalent legislation. These laws vary significantly state by state.
What kinds of things do these laws cover?
They govern absolutely crucial aspects, like precisely how long you have to return a security deposit after a tenant moves out and what deductions are permissible. The exact legal process for eviction, which must be followed to the letter. What fees you're allowed to charge, like late fees. Specific requirements for property maintenance and habitability.
And ignoring these laws.
Ignoring these laws, or federal laws like the Fair Housing Act, can be disastrous. Violating fair housing laws, whether through discriminatory language in advertising, inconsistent screening practices, or improper handling of reasonable accommodation requests, can result in penalties that are incredibly expensive, often 6 figures or more, extremely painful legally and reputationally, and are usually very public. Professional management helps shield you from many of these potentially catastrophic legal mistakes. It's a huge risk mitigator.
We started this whole conversation by questioning how you find personal financial autonomy when the systems themselves seem inherently flawed. Let's confront those systemic flaws head-on now, starting with the massive financial failure that led to the 2008 crisis. The sources provide an incredible, frankly disturbing look at how the subprime mortgage machine was, well, intentionally exploited.
Yeah, this part of the source material is pretty damning. It really gets into the weeds of how the financial models used by the major rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, were absolutely central to the whole subprime mortgage bond trade.
How so? They were supposed to be the referees, right?
They were supposed to be. But you had Wall Street firms, the ones packaging and selling these mortgage bonds, with a clear conflict of interest. Their goal was simple: pay as little as possible for the raw material, the actual home loans, many of them subprime, and charge as much as possible for the finished product, the mortgage-backed securities, which required getting those coveted AAA ratings from Moody's and S&P.
And the rating agencies just gave them.
Well, the sources suggest the Wall Street analysts knew something crucial. The people running the complex mathematical models at the rating agencies were often easily exploited. They sometimes lacked the financial sophistication or maybe the institutional clout to push back effectively against the traders designing the bonds.
Wait, the sources actually quoted insiders calling the subprime raters brain dead. That seems incredibly harsh, but telling.
It is reported directly from individuals involved at the time, yes. The description used was that the teams rating the complex subprime mortgage bonds were often considered sort of the bottom tier within the rating agency hierarchy, sometimes described with terms like, basically, like brain dead, compared to, say, the analysts rating traditional corporate credit or prime mortgages.
That's shocking. What did that environment allow?
It created an environment where the highly sophisticated Wall Street firms, who were paying the rating agencies for the ratings, could effectively manipulate the input variables going into the models, things like assumptions about future default rates or how much money would be recovered in a foreclosure. They could tweak these assumptions to achieve the highest possible ratings, even on bonds backed by incredibly risky loans, essentially worthless debt in many cases, all to keep the lucrative machine churning out product.
Wow. But the manipulation didn't stop just at getting the initial ratings, did it? It extended into the very act of valuing some of these esoteric assets later on. Like, the credit default swaps the bets against the housing market that people like Michael Burry made famous.
Right. This describes a complete breakdown, a massive conflict of interest in the basic function of price discovery. When investors, like the ones profiled in The Big Short, were betting against the market using CDS, they found something alarming. The price, or the mark, of their profitable positions was often dictated almost entirely by the major Wall Street firms they had bought the CDS from, like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bear Stearns back then.
Why did those firms control the price?
because those firms were often on the other side of the trade. They had sold the insurance. And since these CDS were complex, bespoke instruments, there wasn't really an active open market with lots of buyers and sellers to establish a fair price. Effectively, there was often no one else buying and selling these specific contracts.
So the assets were worth.
The sources state the assets were essentially worth whatever Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and others said they were worth. The big firms always claimed they were running perfectly hedged, matched books, but the allegation is they would set the daily or quarterly marks, the reported value of those swaps, to serve their own financial reporting needs, often deliberately lowballing the mark on positions that were winning for the hedge funds and thus losing for the banks, to minimize their own reported losses for that quarter. It undermined the entire concept of a fair market value.
That type of systemic financial failure is, well, purely monetary ultimately. But when we pivot to historical real estate policy in the U.S., we uncover systemic failures that are fundamentally moral and social, with consequences that are still profoundly shaping society today. Let's talk about government-enforced segregation through the Federal Housing Administration, the FHO.
This is perhaps one of the darkest and, for many people, most shocking discoveries in the source material. The FHA, which was established during the New Deal specifically to encourage homeownership and make mortgages more accessible, explicitly conditioned its government-backed financing on new housing developments being racially segregated, specifically all white.
We're talking about huge, iconic, post-war suburban communities.
Yes, communities like Levittown and countless others across the country that were built with FHA financing support. The sources reveal the FHA would actively withhold loan approval for developers if the presence of African Americans in nearby neighborhoods was perceived to threaten integration into the new development.
So it wasn't just passive discrimination. The federal government was an active agent of racial exclusion.
An active driving agent. It wasn't just allowing private prejudice, it was institutionalizing it with the power and financial backing of the federal government.
And it went even further than just approving or denying loans based on neighborhood composition, right? The FHA actually adopted and institutionalized private prejudices, turning them into official federal policy.
They did, horrifyingly. For decades prior, private property owners and builders had sometimes used language in property deeds known as racial covenants to legally prohibit future sales or rentals of that property to African Americans and other minority groups. They did this based on the prejudiced belief that racial exclusion would somehow enhance or protect property values.
And the FHA bought into this.
Completely.
Yeah.
Shockingly, the FHA adopted this racist theory wholesale. They even wrote language reflecting this belief directly into their official underwriting manual, the rule book used by appraisers nationwide to determine property values for FHA-insured loans.
What did the manual say?
The FHA manual explicitly directed appraisers to lower the assigned value of a property if it was located in a racially mixed neighborhood, or even if it was simply near one. It effectively made it official federal government policy that racial exclusion was necessary to maximize lending security and maintain property values. This became a core mechanism of redlining and institutionalized residential segregation that shaped American cities and suburbs for generations, locking Black families out of the primary engine of middle-class wealth creation homeownership for decades.
Shifting from that incredibly painful history to the more modern urban landscape, let's revisit how cities themselves function, or should function. Jane Jacobs, the urbanist writer, offered a powerful counter-argument to those mid-century planners who wanted to just clear out old, seemingly messy neighborhoods for big projects.
Yes, Jacobs was a fierce champion for the necessity of lively streets and vibrant sidewalk life in cities. She argued passionately that this vibrancy, this feeling of safety and community, doesn't arise from some mysterious talent of the local population. It arises only when concrete, tangible facilities are present in abundance.
What kind of facilities?
Things like mixed-use zoning shops on the ground floor, apartments above, lots of small local businesses, short blocks that encourage walking. And crucially, enough people around at different times of day to provide eyes on the street, which creates natural surveillance and safety.
And she argued this appeal isn't just for certain groups.
No, she stressed that this need for vibrant mixed-use walkable areas crosses class lines. The sources point out that wealthy people often pay, quote, enormous rents to live in areas like New York's Greenwich Village, precisely because they desire this exuberant sidewalk life, this urban energy. It's a fundamental human need in cities.
But that dense, concentrated city structure, like in the late 19th century, was actually quite fleeting in the grand scheme of things. What broke the traditional city apart, both economically and functionally?
One main culprit, according to the sources, the automobile. The really dense walking scale cities were, in historical terms, a relatively short-lived phenomenon. They thrived for a period when interurban transportation, think trains, and shipping between cities was actually much better and more efficient than intra-urban transportation, getting around within the city.
So you had to live close to where you worked or shopped.
Exactly. The automobile completely flipped that equation. It enabled widespread commuting from much further out, allowing cities to literally come apart economically and functionally as people, jobs, and retail moved outward to the suburbs.
The impact was that profound.
The sources credit the invention and mass adoption of the car with having more influence on the shape of modern society than the combined exploits of Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Julius Caesar. It fundamentally re-engineered how and where we live, work, and invest.
And what we're left with today, particularly in those suburbs created by the car, is often not the idyllic Brady Bunch image many people still hold. The sources describe something much more complicated and increasingly fraught than new urban crisis, but manifesting in the suburbs.
Yes, the crisis highlighted is the rapid and often overlooked growth of suburban poverty, economic insecurity, and even crime in many areas. The statistics presented are quite staggering. Today, there are actually more people living below the poverty line in American suburbs, around 17 million in the period studied, than in the central cities, around 13.5 million.
More poor people in suburbs than cities. That counters the narrative.
It does. And moreover, suburban poverty has been growing much, much faster. The sources cite a staggering 66% increase in the suburban poor population between 2000 and 2013, compared to a 29% increase in urban areas during the same time.
What's driving that shift?
It seems to be a combination of factors. It includes lower-income families being displaced from increasingly expensive city centers and seeking more affordable housing further out. But it also includes formerly middle-class suburban families who fell into poverty due to manufacturing job losses, the 2008 recession's impact on housing wealth, or simply rising housing costs outpacing stagnant wages even in their own suburban communities. The stark inequalities that once primarily defined the inner city now increasingly rival, or in some cases even surpass, those found in many suburban areas. The landscape has become far more complex. So if we try to synthesize this huge amount of source material, what are the threads? I think it's this. Personal financial success absolutely requires that deliberate focus on self-improvement, on fundamentally changing your identity and consciously escaping the consumption-driven rat race.
And the financial strategy itself.
That strategy demands understanding the evidence for indexing as a core, diversifying smartly with assets like REITs that behave differently, and strategically leveraging powerful tax structures like the Roth IRA, and especially for real estate, the 1031 exchange.
But you can't do that in a vacuum.
Not at all. All of this personal strategy must be executed while being acutely, constantly aware of the deep systemic risks that are clearly built into things like Wall Street's often opaque financial models, and also aware of the historical institutional unfairness embedded in systems like the housing market, thanks to policies like FHA segregation.
And drilling down into real estate investment itself, it seems inexorably linked to both those harsh mechanics, financing, rehab, management, but also to that complex history and the modern crisis of suburbanization we just discussed.
Exactly. To succeed, you almost have to be two things at once. A highly competent operator dealing with the nuts and bolts, and a sophisticated student of history, finance, and social structures, just to understand and navigate the playing field successfully. The individual path to wealth and the structural flaws or features of society are really inseparable forces you have to grasp.
So, we always like to leave you with one final, maybe provocative thought based on everything we've covered. We discussed the efficient market hypothesis in finance, the theory, at least in its weaker forms, that the system is somewhat rational and prices reflect information reasonably well. Compare that to the historical reality we uncovered in the housing market, where a government agency, the FHA, actively and explicitly enforced segregation and redlining, distorting that market for generations.
A stark contrast indeed.
So given that contrast between the theoretical efficiency of finance and the documented inefficiency and injustice in housing history, here's the question for you to consider. How do you personally calibrate your expectations of risk and reward in real estate today? Which system, the dynamic, complex, sometimes manipulated financial market, or the deeply embedded, historically shaped societal structure of the housing market presents the greater, or perhaps just the more unpredictable, hurdle to building lasting wealth right now?
Something to really mull over.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.